Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of Search News You Can Use, and we're going to talk today about the latest changes in search over the last week. This is working really well where we're doing the newsletter and all of these updates weekly now. It makes it a lot easier for us to stay on top of things. I thought that the newsletter would be way shorter now that we're doing it every week instead of every 2 weeks, but it turns out that there's still tons of stuff to talk about. And what we're finding is that we can do a little bit more commentary on the things that you need to know. So in this episode, we're going to talk about an algorithm update again that has happened, and also some stuff that really is only included in the paid version of my newsletter, but it's too good not to talk about it today. What we're going to talk about is a new Google algorithm, which looks quite interesting and probably has the capability of really affecting how SEO is done. And then also a neat e-commerce link building tip that I thought was pretty cool. So let's get on to the newsletter here. I should comment too that if you have any questions, feel free to leave a comment in the chat. And once I'm finished going through the newsletter, I'll take a look at those and see if I can help you out. I should apologize as well. I have just a little bit of a cold, so if my voice sounds kind of weird, that's why. So algorithm updates, we've had some type of a significant algorithm update pretty much weekly for the last few weeks. In the last episode, we talked about April 23rd being it was a moderate algorithm update, and April 16th before that was quite a big update. We saw a lot of changes at that time. I didn't think that I'd have much to report on this week until I started looking at analytics data and actually saw quite a few sites that saw either increases or decreases on April 30th of 2018. It's hard to recognize any patterns just yet for these sites, but what I did notice was that we saw improvements on a couple of sites that we've worked with to really trim out thin content and greatly improve user experience. Now, I find it interesting, this particular site, so this is information from SEMrush. A lot of my clients, I'm reluctant to post their actual Google Analytics data for privacy reasons, but SEMrush, this particular site started seeing their spikes in analytics on April 30th. And it's interesting that SEMrush was noticing this is mostly based on keyword rankings. And so things started to improve a few days before them. This was before that. This was one of these sites that we really worked with to improve user experience. They had tons of stuff that was hidden behind tabs, just things that made it difficult for the user to navigate the site. And so we helped them fix all that up, and they're starting to see some nice improvements. This other site that you can see was hit on April 16th. And then in this case, SEMrush matches what we see in analytics. They're seeing quite a decline. This is another site that had loads of thin content, and they had tons of content that I would call near copied content. I've spoken about this before, but what we're looking at for near copied content is content that's taken from other sources and reworded, and really there's no value added to this content. I gave an example previously of a site that we reviewed that took a lot of content from Reddit and just reworded it and made a news article out of it. And that site was hit hard with the March 9th update. And I feel like most of the updates that we've seen over the last month or two have been Google trying to determine relevancy and quality. And so this particular site, we had recommended to them, they had a bunch of content that was basically taken from a very authoritative source, not exactly spun, not machine spun, but written in a way that just the words were slightly different. And at one point it ranked really well. And then I feel like Google's algorithms just got better at figuring out that, hey, if we had to show users the original source versus this source, there's really no reason for them to want to click on this source. And so they have not made any changes as far as we can see, and they're being hit even further. And so this is something, now I know a lot of you who are listening to this, if you're a client of mine and I've reviewed your site, we've given this advice to many sites, so I may or may not be talking about you. And the point is that this is a really common thing. And what Google is getting better at doing is truly, truly figuring out which sites our users are finding useful. So, so something to keep an eye on. I'm going to keep monitoring sites to see, was this April 30th thing big? I would say, probably about 30% of the sites that we monitor had either an increase or decrease that was significant, that was not seasonal, that we saw on April 30th. I did want to tie that in with this right here. We are, as a team, we're starting to offer a new service where we'll just keep an eye on your analytics for you. And every week when I review my analytics data and determine whether I think there was an update or not, what we'll do is we'll look at that specifically for your site and let you know whether you've been hit or potentially seen improvements after this algorithm update. In most cases, we won't be able to give you specific advice to your site. That would take extra consulting. But what we can do is say, oh, we think this update had to do with this particular problem, and then we'll create some content to tell you in general how to deal with that. So we're just taking a few clients to start off with this because it is a new service. And if you're interested in this, you can reach me at marie@mariehaynes.com. And we have room to, we've signed up a few already. We have room to sign up a few more before we close this. And then if it works out well, we'll make it open to everybody. Let's talk about featured snippets. So featured snippets, as you know, are the little thing that comes up at the very beginning of the search results. Not every single search, but a lot of searches have this position 0 result. Something that Glenn Gabe noticed is that now some of the featured snippets are actually YouTube videos, and Google is going specifically to the spot in the video that answers the user's question. Now, that's not new. Google started doing that last year, but I do think it's new that this is happening in featured snippets. So how do you fight this? Maybe one of the ways is to start creating more video content. I think that's something that we'll probably, well, we are experimenting with it personally now, doing this video that you're watching right now. But I think a lot of sites could probably benefit from producing video. And I don't think it has to be crazy expensive productions. Sometimes even just, phones these days are pretty good at recording stuff. My mic that I have here, it cost me under $100 for this really good mic. That's about all of my costs. So I think that's something that a lot of sites should really look into. I won't spend too much time on these changes coming to Google News. Google News is an area that I feel like I need to be more of an expert in to advise on. But if you are involved in Google News, this is something to pay attention to. And again, any of these things that I'm talking about, you can find them at mariehaynes.com/newsletter. And you can follow this link here to read more information on these changes. I'm happy to see that Algo is back online. This is another rank checking. Well, basically, it keeps an eye on the search results and then tells us whether there's been a lot of volatility. So Mozcast does that, and also SEMrush Sensor does a good job. I really liked the Algo. I like them all, but Algo seems to be pretty accurate. So that's great. Hopefully, I know at one point we would get updates. I'm not sure at Dejan SEO whether you're still doing that, but I would love to continue to get updates when you're seeing there's volatility in the SERPs. Let's talk about this. If you're a woman in SEO who wants to do more speaking, then Kirstie Hulse has put out a very generous offer to do some mentoring to help you get a speaking gig. I've done a fair amount of speaking, and I would certainly be happy to give you some tips. I'm not an expert by any means, but I'm still learning. But if you're a woman who wants to speak more, there are conferences who are just dying to get more women speakers. Now, this is kind of a bone of contention for me because I never want to be chosen as a speaker just because of my gender. I want to be chosen because I'm going to bring good value. With that said, it's hard for these conference organizers because a lot of the time they'll get, if they get 100 applicants, maybe only 10 of them are women. And so, we need to get more women to apply to speak. And I don't know why it is that we don't see more. But I will also, if you are interested in speaking, feel free to contact me and I'll do what I can to help you. I'm pretty excited about Moz's new Link Explorer, and there are a few articles that we've linked to that talk about what's new in the Link Explorer. I think the best thing is the Whiteboard Friday that Rand did, and there's a few things to know. They have greatly improved the size of the link index, which was my biggest concern, especially when I was doing tons of link audits. We're still doing some link audits, but not nearly as many as I did a few years ago. I would include Moz data in the past, but it was sort of like I included it so I could tell people that I got links from multiple sources. But Moz data never used to be that great. And now they've got a database that's 20 times larger than it used to be. They're updating much more frequently. It used to take months sometimes for new links to be picked up. There are improved spam score metrics, and that's something I have to investigate still. I know when spam score first came out, I had issues with it just because a lot of people were misunderstanding how to use the tool. And so I do still think that even if spam score is improved, if you're using it to make disavow decisions, it should be something that's used along with common sense. You never want to take a list from Moz or from any other tool and just blindly throw those into your disavow file. But it sounds like they've worked hard to improve the metrics, and that's a good thing. And then there's a few other things. I've heard people raving about how you can separate the links out by domain authority. That's a whole other issue that we could talk about at some point. A domain authority can be helpful in deciding whether you're getting a good link or not. But keep in mind that you can still get good links from low domain authority sites. If they're relevant, if they bring traffic to your site, that's a good thing. And you can also get bad links from high domain authority sites. So again, you want to use that in combination with good thinking in order to decide on your links. A little bit about local SEO. This is pretty exciting that Google My Business now is going to have a dashboard that agencies can use. And so if you are an agency and you monitor multiple Google My Business profiles, this sounds like something that's really going to be useful. I think that's all we'll talk about for the newsletter. We've got a bunch of articles that are pretty good, and we'd recommend reading them. If you are a paid subscriber to the newsletter, each of these articles, we've done a bit of a summary on them as well. So let's talk about a couple of other things. Let's move on here to, there we go. And like I said, feel free to add questions in the chat, and I'd be happy to give my thoughts if you have any questions. I wanted to talk about two other things. So one, in the paid version of the newsletter, I talked about this kind of interesting link building tactic that is totally above board and works well for e-commerce. I don't know if you guys saw this ad, and it was for these cutout jeans. And basically the jeans were almost no material and just holes. So the whole hole had been cut out. And it was something that you look at it and you're like, nobody in their right mind would wear this. But the thing is, people will talk about it. And so when I looked at the page that was advertising this, and then I looked at the link profile, they have links from The Sun, from like a whole bunch of news, very authoritative sites. They have people talking all over social media about it. I'm talking about it right now, although I don't think I linked to it. I probably should have linked to it. The point is, they got tons of links. And in the newsletter, I show you the SEMrush graph where the traffic is just going up and up. And so this is kind of cool. If you look at the product says it's out of stock. I'm betting that it never was in stock. I think they just created it. They had fun creating it, and then they put some press out to get the word out. And that's the type of thing that really can move the needle, not just in terms of links, but also I think that it can work to improve your EAT. So I've spoken a lot about EAT, about expertise, authoritativeness, and trust. And one of the things that EAT is based on is mentions around the web. Now, yes, if you get a mention from the New York Times, that's fantastic. But it doesn't have to be a super authoritative mention in order, in my opinion, in order for EAT to be recognized. So, for example, if everybody on social media is talking about your brand And I do believe that Google can recognize the sentiment. So if people are saying really cool things about your brand, that's something that really should be recognized. And Google can say like, hey, everybody's talking about this business. We probably should we probably should do something about that, and maybe we want to rank them higher. So that's really something to pay attention to. And I think if you have an e-commerce business, play around with it, create a silly product, and just see, can you actually get people to pay attention to it. The final thing I want to talk about is this new article that came out in which Google has talked about a new algorithm. And I think we need to pay attention to this. It's an algorithm that looks at how questions are handled on Google. Now, when this first came out, my thought was that this is what Hummingbird was about. Hummingbird initially, Google had said they've got better at determining the relevancy of questions. So for example, if somebody asked, how do you win at Mario Kart without cheat codes? The old algorithm would show you things with cheat codes. It couldn't recognize that word about or without. And the new Hummingbird got better at figuring out, oh, okay, they want this. Well, it sounds like they're taking it even a step further. Now, after I published the newsletter, there was an article on Search Engine Roundtable where Barry Schwartz noticed that in some situations, Google's actually putting a thing in the search results, encouraging people to ask questions. So I'm going to write more about this in the next newsletter. But I think that what's happening is Google's going to take those questions and use them as a machine learning set to just figure out how to answer questions. Now, that's kind of scary, right? Because right now what happens is Google figures out what the question is and figures out which website answers that the best. And I think Google's moving towards just answering the questions, which is a little bit frightening. So how do we deal with this? I think it's important, just like every business, every website that is reliant on Google, you need to make it so that you offer something that Google cannot replace. If your business model was telling people what time it is in another time zone, you've probably been killed by Google. If your business model is simply Q&A, then you have to be able to provide even more value than just getting the question answered in a couple of lines. I know that's kind of vague, but I think my point in all of these algorithm updates that we keep seeing, what we're seeing is that Google wants to show people the absolute best information. And what we've been doing in our site reviews is looking at your site compared to your competitors and saying, hey, do you actually provide significantly more value than your competitors? And it's amazing how often the answer to that is no. And so we have a few ideas of how to produce that value. Some of that involves generating user-generated content. There are other things as well. But the point is that SEO is changing. Gone are the days, in most cases, where you can just have the same content as everybody else, and if you can get links to that content, it'll rank well. You really, really have to focus on quality, not just in terms of technical SEO, but in the value that you're providing to people. So that's all we have for today. It looks like we don't have any comments, which is totally okay. If you do have a question that you want me to cover, maybe in the next newsletter or the next time I do this live YouTube video, just send me an email, marie@mariehaynes.com, and I'd be happy to include that. So hope things go well with your rankings this week. Hopefully we don't have any devastating algo updates, and I wish you all the best. Thanks.